All right. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Hey, Antonio, doing good.
Great. Good to see you. Thanks for your time tonight. I wanted to talk to you about your experience as a software engineer. You're a software engineer in one of the top technology companies. And at a high level, for somebody who's never heard about what a software engineer does, can you explain?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So at its core, software engineers build software. It's pretty obvious. They're the very obvious ones like, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Netflix, like everybody knows these names. But there's also the not so glamorous pieces of software that people use on a daily basis, but they're not aware that they're built by software engineers. As an example, banking systems that allow you to withdraw and deposit cash. These are very complicated pieces of software that equally requires top engineering teams to build. At the end of the day, if it's digital, it's probably built by a team of software engineers. To build software like these, basically what a software engineer does is they spend a significant proportion of their time writing code. Now, what is code? It's essentially a set of instructions that are to be processed by a computer. This is key because if you think about it, if you can instruct a computer to do a set of steps, computers can execute these steps in at the scale of milliseconds. Something that will require a human to do in a minute, they can do in 5 milliseconds. So that's super important to note because it enables one thing, scale. And that's the reason why software is so powerful because once you write these instructions once, you can have it execute repeatedly for as long as you need. And that's how you have massive, massive impact. And essentially that's what software is.
Awesome. Thank you. When did you decide you wanted to become a software engineer?
So I actually decided to be a software engineer in my graduating year of college. I had come to the conclusion that hard technical skills are the hardest to obtain and should therefore lead to a rewarding career. For the most part, it was correct. In addition, I realized that I would be self-sufficient if I ever decided to pursue my own thing. Let's say I wanted to do my own startup, right? If that was the case, I wouldn't need to hire another software engineer or developer. I could do it myself. And that would save me a lot of money. So it's also very practical for me to have done that as well.
Right. So in college, you studied engineering, but not computer science, right?
Yeah, it's actually becoming more prominent now where people who enter software engineering don't study computer science or software engineering in school. For me, I studied industrial/systems engineering. And as part of the curriculum, we didn't have much of a focus on computer science, but we did have a couple of courses, several theoretical ones, as well as several practical ones that allowed me to build actual applications. And that was kind of my start into this domain.
Got it. And then when you decided you wanted to become a software engineer to prepare for the applications and for the job, did you do any online courses or training?
For the most part, all of that kind of happened. So if you're an engineer, there's something called GitHub, which basically many engineers use. That's a place for you to showcase the work that you've built. And show it to future employers and others who are interested to see what you've built. So I did a bit of that actually prior to me applying for jobs. In addition, I took some courses on YouTube. Well, actually, they're available on YouTube, but they're primarily through Coursera, which goes over very conceptual topics like algorithms and data structures. And these you can find online for free, essentially. And they're actually very important for two reasons. One is they really give you a foundational understanding of computer science. But in addition, it's very useful for when you're preparing for the technical interviews, especially for some of these top tech companies that require you to have a very, very deep understanding of these concepts. So basically, you can find these on YouTube, but data structures, algorithms are definitely a good place to start.
Got it. And what type of engineer are you? And also, I frequently hear computer engineer, computer programmer. Are those kind of referring to the same thing, or is there any difference?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for the most part, they're used interchangeably, depending on where your company, so which company you work for. I think they might lean towards one or the other. I know that if you work in, let's say, big tech in Silicon Valley, typically the role is software engineer. But in other places, the names are used interchangeably. For the most part, I think the work they do is very similar. I think if you are if your title is computer programmer, it might mean that you spend more of your time programming and less of your time doing other things that are also relevant for building a software application. As an example, designing systems. So not only do you need to program as in write code, but you also need to you need to have a design for that code, right? It's kind of like think of it as actually like you're a construction worker trying to build a building, right? Construction worker building all those pieces, that's actually coding, but the person who's designing the blueprint is the designer. In this case, it could be like an architect, right? So similarly, you need these designers for building software. So if you're just a if your title is computer programmer, you may not do the designing aspect. But if you're a software engineer, you tend to have to do everything. So that's one key component. Also, when you're a programmer, whether through whether you're a computer programmer or a software engineer, you also have the distinction between typically working on two different stacks rather. There's front end and back end. When I say stack, what that basically means is you're either working on code that is directly visible to like your browser. So like if I go to facebook.com, the UI, the interface that pops up, that's programmed by front-end engineers. Similarly, if you go on your iPhone and you load up some app, let's say the Facebook app on the iPhone, that's been created by a mobile engineer, which is also a front-end engineer. In contrast to front-end engineer, you have a back-end engineer, which is what I am. So I'm primarily a back-end software engineer. And that's basically everything else. So it's the stuff that you don't see, but it's actually just as critical, if not more critical than a front-end engineer engineering role. Where if you think about it, it's like, let's say you go on Facebook and you search for something. So you search for, or let's say you go on to YouTube, rather, actually YouTube's a better example, and you search for some video content, right? The front end, the UI is what you see, but then when you actually type in the actual keywords, there's a million things that are happening in the background that ultimately return back for you 10 videos that are like the best recommended content for your specific needs. That took a lot of algorithms, took a lot of processing, took a lot of like machine learning potentially. Yeah. All that is in the backend. And so there's definitely a lot of impact in doing the backend as well. And so that's why I primarily work on. Yeah.
Got it. And as a backend software engineer, who are the main stakeholders? Who are the other teams you work with?
Yeah, so most of my stakeholders are internal engineers at the company. So essentially my team builds software that facilitate their jobs in the sense that they need to run their own pieces of software. They need to build their own pieces of software. So our software they use to figure out how to best build their software. That's kind of my main focus.
Got it. Okay, so now let's switch gears and talk about a typical day for you. So from when you start your day in the morning to when the day ends, what does the day look like? You spend time, what percentage of your time is coding? What percentage of your time is like meetings and then anything else?
Yeah, so on a typical day, I spend most of my time trying to enable and unblock my team. So I'm at a point where I'm not only a software engineer anymore, but I'm also a tech lead, which basically means that I lead the technical aspect of the team of engineers. So at this point in my career, most of my time now is spent trying to enable and unblock my team. It used to be that I would spend most of my time coding, but as a software engineer, you progress in your career, and once you reach the state, it's actually more scalable for you to not code as much and to be a force multiplier to enable your peer engineers to deliver their best work. This means setting the technical direction of the team, mentoring them, doing effective code reviews, which are basically saying that when the engineers write the code, I review it to make sure that it's good. It functionally makes sense. It's also written well. It's readable. It's maintainable. All the aspects of writing good software are there. I also spend a lot of my time getting buy-in from other teams. So basically ensuring that our teams can work on the things that they work on because we have sponsorship from our leadership or from other teams who are our customers. So that's a lot of writing proposals to justify what we'll be working on, et cetera. So basically, for me, it's a little bit different because I'm a tech lead. So I would say coding for me has taken a back seat in the sense that it's probably like closer to 30% of my time. I would say 30% for coding, maybe 20%, let's say 30% for designing. So I was mentioning about building that blueprint. So that's designing, so about 30% for that. Meetings, I've actually found a way to minimize that. So for my intensive purposes, so maybe like 15%. So it leaves me about 25% left, right? 25% is basically all the other stuff I just mentioned, like writing proposals, etc.
Emails,
emails, that sort of stuff. Yeah. So yeah.
Cool. And what would you say is your favorite part of being a software engineer? What makes it special?
Yeah, I think the coolest thing is the fact that within a single day, right, you get into the office, somebody has a feature request. It's like, hey, can you please introduce a new button on Facebook, let's say, as an example, and then that button does like a million things, and then all of that can be done in a single day. So before you go home for the end of the day, you could have delivered on a key piece of functionality that scales immensely depending on how large your user base is. So the way I see it is it's rapid feedback for when you build something, you can see it come to fruition. And that instant gratification is kind of like a dopamine hit. It's kind of like a high, actually. And I think many engineers enter this field because they really value that. And so there's also another benefit of like, there's a certain art to coding as well. I think people see it as a very binary thing. It's like you either code it or you don't. But actually, there are 100 ways to code the same thing, depending on who you are, whether it's this engineer that codes it or this engineer. And there's different things you want to maximize. You want to maximize how elegant the code is. You want to maximize how readable it is, how maintainable, how composable. Composable means like, let's say that someone else can use this code in their code, the ability to compose new code using your code. So there's so many ways to do it in an artistic way that makes it very fun, for lack of a better word. So yeah.
Yeah, and you impact somewhat the life of millions of people, all your users,
totally.
right?
Exactly. Yep.
What about something that instead you don't enjoy as much?
So I guess this is a good question. I think sometimes you will occasionally get requests for features by certain customers, and they may actually conflict with other feature requests from other customers. And in those cases, it's trying to reconcile which one to build, because they're actually opposing forces. And a lot of it is actually trying to, at its core, understand fundamentally why they diverge and also what they're trying to solve. Because generally, what you'll find is that customers state they want a feature, but in reality, that's just really a symptom of a problem that they really want solved. So if you get to the root of their problem, you'll find that those two different divergent requests may actually have the same problem, and you can solve that same problem with another feature request. And I think that's what's challenging, is trying to decipher all these things. As a software engineer, you just want to build something, right? But you also have to consider these human aspects as well, and to really put on different caps depending on the specific needs of the organization. So
yep. So for somebody who's listening and perhaps trying to decide what kind of career to follow, who do you think this career could be a good fit?
This is a great career for someone who is very logical, who enjoys doing puzzles, for example. I think that's the best example. Someone who really enjoys puzzles, I'm sure, would enjoy being a software engineer, because at its core, every day you're solving problems, and they're technical problems. And it requires you to think very logically every day, because everything is at its core, it's very logical, basically. And I think it's also for someone who likes to tackle very ambiguous problems, because generally, like as I mentioned, not necessarily would you know exactly what to build. You'll just know that there is a problem that needs to be solved. There's also a lot of time that I spend, I guess I didn't mention this in the ratios earlier, but you also need to spend a lot of time debugging as well sometimes, right? So occasionally, or rather, there will always be bugs in software. And sometimes they can be very tricky to debug. What that means is, at its core, it's like, one piece of line of code somewhere in the code base is causing something to behave differently. Getting to that particular line is very tricky sometimes, and it might require a lot of investigation, might even take you several hours. And after several hours, you realize like, you missed a comma or something like that. And that's the type of like patience it demands of you sometimes when you're building software, is this type of patience to be able to deal with that as well. So patience, investigative mindset, logic, rationality. That's the very technical aspect. I didn't talk about also the very the interpersonal skills that are necessary as well, because as I mentioned, as you grow in your career and you advance the tech lead, most of your time now is spent towards dealing with other people. And so, this is actually something that I was going to mention, is that people think that if you're a software engineer, all you do is code, but that's only applicable, I think, for the very early stages of your career. Like when you just start out, yeah, that's probably going to be like 90% coding, 10% everything else. But that ratio flips every level you rise in your career. So people skills basically cannot be underestimated here. It's definitely very important.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to somebody who's considering becoming a software engineer?
So I think first, see if you like it. The best way to do that is to try to. There's a lot of good resources online for building applications. So first, you need to learn a programming language. So you can choose, Java, Python, Ruby, and then you can use that to try to build an actual application, whether it be a web application or even like some sort of like RPG game. You can build whatever you want. See if you actually enjoy the process. That shouldn't take too long. Like it'll take like a few weeks. Once you've done that, then you can, if you enjoy it, then the next thing is to try to potentially build a portfolio of work that you can showcase to future employers. This is valuable in some cases, but it's not strictly necessary. But if you want to play it safe, this is a really good thing to do, because if you can start this process very early on, you'll build a whole very comprehensive portfolio of projects that kind of grow over time. Think of it as like your resume. You continually add to it year over year, and it showcases more and more work. And anytime you need to, try to pitch yourself to a future employer, you don't need to really show them your resume or your cover letter as much as your GitHub or wherever you're storing all your projects. I would say this is, again, kind of a bonus. But if you want to, really get into this, like if you determine that you like it and you want to pursue it, of course, you can consider doing a computer science or software engineering background. Again, not strictly necessary, but it's a plus. Now, once you've graduated, you want to start doing, before you graduate, you want to start to do internships as well. Internships are great because they're great for two reasons. One, you can learn a lot, especially in the 4 to 6 months that you're there. Two, they're actually a way for you to kind of showcase your practical skill set to your employer. So when you graduate and want a full-time job, they typically can have signal as to how effective you are as an engineer, and that allows you to kind of get past the interview process a lot easier than if you were to come in with fresh blank slate. So that's a key advantage for doing internship. And then once you've done an internship, I will say that in some cases, in every case, you need to also do a full interview, whether you want to go into the internship or whether you want to go for the full time. And for the interview, depending on where you live, this will vary quite a lot. So if you apply for a big tech company, let's say a Google or a Facebook or whatever, and they're based in even like Italy or any other country, they generally have a very high bar for software engineers to get in. And as I mentioned, it's basically data structures and algorithms that they really test you on. And so you need to spend some time working on these problems. I would say, depending on how much experience you have, it could take as little as like 3 months to as long as like a year and a half to basically practice a set of problems that these companies will ask you. And once you have those questions, well versed and you can do them pretty quickly, then you also need to work on your systems design skills, which is basically that whole architect thing I was talking about. This one is harder to find content for online because like everyone does it differently, but you can definitely YouTube a lot of these videos too. Like you can say systems design, how to build Facebook or how to build Google, and people will kind of give their perspective of like how the internal systems at these companies work. And you just have to kind of go get it through experience and watching these videos and stuff like that. So once you've done those two things and you have like a GitHub, then and you have experience, building applications or whatever, then you're in a pretty good shape to apply. And then just persist as you go through interviews. You may get some rejections, but that's fine because most of these companies will typically allow you to reapply after 6 months. So it's not like it's the world if you get rejected. So yeah, that's basically yeah.
Got it. And anything you wish you knew before becoming a software engineer? Anything that if you learned earlier would have helped your career?
Yeah, I think I think I just wish I knew how much people skills is still required being an engineer, because it's not just coding anymore. It's also a large part of my job now is communication. So being able to convey and pitch a proposal to management, who will then decide to either fund or not fund the project, is key. And if they decide not to fund it, it'll determine the whole course of my team's work, simply because I was not able to pitch it well enough. So I see it actually, depending on the size of the company you work for, you'll get to a point in your career where a large part of your time is spent towards this aspect. And I see it almost like as if you're working for your own startup, where let's say you're running a startup and you're the only engineer. You have to do everything, like not just the coding of building the application for your app, but you need to do like literally everything. You need to pitch to VCs, you need to get funding, you need to hire people, you need to train people, you need to write a good technical strategy that everyone will follow for the next like 10 years. You need to hire, like there's just so many different things, right? And so it's all these other aspects. So I wish I knew this going in. I'm starting to, enjoy some of these things more than I did before. But I think my expectations initially were, more coding, more design, less of these things. But I think inherently you'll reach a point where it flips the ratio. And if you're happy with that, fantastic. You just have to be cognizant of it as you enter this career.
Yeah, so it sounds like when you're early in your career, it's a lot about having the hard technical skills. And then once you progress, you need to develop those soft skills.
Exactly.
Being able to communicate with other teams.
Exactly. Yep. There's definitely diminishing returns to being very technically savvy. I think as you progress, it's more about the other skills actually that matter much more than the very hard technical skills that you needed to first get into the company.
Got it. Great. Thanks so much, Mike. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure, Antonio. Thanks a lot.
All right. See you soon.